If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I've been a fan of Pokemon since the mid to late 2000s, with the third generation being my introduction to the series. But something you may not know is that I've been a Digimon fan for longer than that. So yeah, I wasn't going into Digimon Story Time Stranger through the lens of a Pokemon detractor who's been betrayed by how mediocre Pokemon games have become, or to own the Nintendrones or whatever. I would have bought it regardless of how I felt about Pokemon, because I like Digimon, with Season 3 of the original anime, aka Digimon Tamers, being my personal favorite when watching it on Jetix in the 2000s. However, as far as Digimon video games go, I never got into any of them. Not even when I first discovered what emulators were as a teenager, because, well, Bandai Namco never really had its finger on the pulse of what Digimon fans wanted out of a Digimon game, since in general, they've pretty much been doing what I like to call the sacred corporate art of random bullshit go, hoping that one thing will hit a bullseye and become successful in a never-ending spray and pray tactic. I never got into Digimon World for the PlayStation because it looked cheap, and you were forced to play Pet Simulator with your Digimon, cleaning up their digital poop and other weird things like that. Obviously taking inspiration from the franchise's original concept of being Tamagotchis aimed at boys, which I thought was pretty lame to begin with. I remember back in the day asking a family member to get me a Digimon game for the PS2 when he took me to Circuit City one time, but he said no. And apparently the game sucked anyway, so whatever. I tried playing Cyber Sleuth, but got bored after a few hours because of how blatantly derivative it was of another franchise. I was hyped for Digimon Survive despite its lengthy development time, but that was a massive disappointment for me because of how lazily designed the gameplay was. And that's not counting all the other obscure Digimon games made over the years that aren't exactly all that great either. My point is, I know that some of y'all clicked on this video because you used to be Pokemon fans who have become disillusioned with the franchise, and y'all want to try out this newly released alternative that everyone is raving about. Which is fine, by the way. I'm not trying to shame you for it. The Digimon fanbase is small and ever growing after all. But I feel like you need to know what you're getting yourself into. Because despite how garbage Pokemon games have been for the past 8 or so years, which cannot be understated, Pokemon games since the Switch era have definitely been garbage. I'm just letting y'all know right now, whether we're talking about the video games in general, or some of the different anime series that have spawned over the last 10 to 15 years, as a longtime fan, Digimon is no stranger to mediocrity either. In fact, I would argue that Digimon has been mediocre for longer than Pokemon, due to the IP being stuck in a rut of mismanagement and neglect. I'm not even joking. The closest that a Digimon game came to being good was Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. However, even then, it was a budget title originally released for the PS Vita, during a time when JRPGs in general were going through a dark period. It was very mid. A solid 3 out of 5 game that was nothing to write home about. Not to mention the elephant in the room, which was how it shamelessly ripped off a lot of its ideas from the Shin Megami Tensei series. And I mean a lot. From the silent main protagonist, to the digital world being like the TV world from Persona 4, it wasn't even trying to hide what it was clearly inspired by. Regardless, it had a cult following and would get re-released along with Hacker's Memory in a dual release that I did try playing, but like I've said before in previous videos, I just wasn't a fan of the sleek 2010 social media theme they were going with, and all the unmemorable character designs that had no thought, care, or direction put into them. Compare this generic crap to how the characters and world building were from the original show, and you can immediately see where there was no attempt at emulating the style and atmosphere of how Digimon presented itself in the anime. It's like I'm watching a community theater adaptation of Digimon, or a CW live-action adaptation where it loses all the grit and attitude that made the series memorable. And I know that's probably ignorant of me to say, since I never really actually put more than a few hours into Cyber Sleuth, and I also know I'll probably go back and play it along with Hacker's Memory at some point in the future, but it is what it is. Then I tried playing Digimon Survive after the 4 years of development hell it went through, and let me tell you something. The further I got into it, the more it stunned me at how bad the game really was. And it's a shame. It really gave me an excellent first impression due to the well-designed cast of characters with unique personalities, genuine relationships, and realistic fears, as if it were trying to replicate the Digimon Adventure formula, but with a more mature direction, given that they were mostly high schoolers this time around. I also liked what it was trying to do with the visual novel aspects, as the art did look pretty clean. But the story was retarded, introducing weirdly complicated concepts that would make Kingdom Hearts and Metal Gear Solid blush. Like how the main characters got trapped not in the digital world full of Digimon, but in an alternate dimension full of Komonogamis, which the Digimon in the digital world are based on. And spoilers for anyone who hasn't played Digimon Survive, but I'm just going to say this anyway. I'll make sure to put a timestamp, just in case you actually feel like playing Digimon Survive for some reason and don't want the story spoiled. But there was also a plot point where Renamon was pretending to be a 10-year-old boy to protect the sister of a professor who got trapped along with the main cast. Which wouldn't be so weird if they didn't keep referring to Renamon as a guy after it was revealed she was pretending to be a guy the whole time, and she wasn't being brainwashed by 4 sacred beasts to kidnap and traffic cute little desperate children, and sat there with a scalpel on the children's heads who even after 126 months were fighting. And then Renamon went, "Look how tough I am," and just, "Ha ha 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 ha!" And then she goes, "I love you, Satan, I love you, Satan, I love you, Satan, I love you, Satan!" As the children beg, and the 4 sacred beasts all run over and start drinking the blood, and they all have sex with each other, and they pledge along with Renamon to get your kids, pledge to overthrow God, pledge to overthrow prosperity, and they drive through the countryside to see your nice cut fields, and your pretty little farmhouses, and your nice kids, and they want to kill you. So yeah, it was really weird that Renamon was pretending to be a guy and doing all of that. And I already know what some of y'all are going to say about this. Renamon isn't actually a boy or a girl. The original writer had an androgynous design in mind when coming up with Renamon. In the anime, they/them said that they didn't feel comfortable sitting at the girls' table because Digimon don't have a canonical gender. Therefore, every Digimon, including Renamon, is actually non-binary. Yeah, that never actually happened. What Renamon said in that episode of the anime was a mistranslation from the original Japanese script. And I don't think the writer for the show, Chikai J. Konaka, had gender nonconformity in mind when coming up with the concept of Renamon in the first place. But even if he did, it wouldn't be like how some of y'all are thinking. Especially not back in 2001, when everyone still viewed gender as a concrete thing. If you want to know the actual reality of this, most people on the planet still view gender as a concrete thing, and there are just a couple of confused people. But my point is, if every Digimon, including Renamon, don't have an official canonical gender, that would really only be because they are digital creatures. And the logic with how these digital creatures are categorized is different than how humans are. So Digimon would be confused about gender like they would be about any other human category like race, or class, or religion. Duh. Obviously. And while the writer for the show did have an androgynous design in mind when coming up with the concept of Renamon at first, in the show itself, she's anything but androgynous. Same goes for some of the other Digimon too, like in Digimon Adventure when this happens.
I've never been so relaxed in my whole life.
Hey, Digimon, you're not supposed to be over here. Get back to the boys' side.
Hey, let go! Hey!
While on paper, Digimon don't actually have a set canonical gender, in practice, there are specific Digimon where you can tell they're boys with male characteristics and girls with female characteristics, and there are conflicts in the plot where gender does become a factor with relation to Digimon. So to all the retarded globalists who are looking for another excuse to post a 1,000-word essay in the comments section about why I'm a transphobic Nazi this week, there's a reason why Renamon is so popular of a character in the Digimon fanbase, and it's not because of how manly or gender non-conforming she is. Renamon is a girl, and the writer who came up with Renamon agrees with me on that. There. Now go start typing before the government passes a bill that lets them invade your home and fuck your wife. Anyway, fast forward to the beginning of 2025 after the trailer for Digimon Story Time Stranger dropped, and I decided to keep my expectations really low due to how disappointing all the attempts at making a Digimon game have been since the franchise's existence, but I'd be lying if I wasn't at least a little hyped for it. Now let's fast forward to today, where I've invested many hours into the game, and I'd like to share my overall thoughts. So how is it? Well, to begin, let's discuss the presentation. The best way I can describe it is that it looks like Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, but with a slightly bigger budget. It doesn't look horrible or anything, but it won't impress you if you've been playing JRPGs for the past 2 decades like me. In fact, I would say it looks like it could have been a PS3 game that you would buy on the PSN store for about $40. Not something you'd spend $70 or more on for modern consoles. It certainly looks a hell of a lot better than the latest Pokemon games do, but again, the bar on that is already on the ground, you'd have to dig a hole to lower it further. During my first 5 or so hours of playing, I was pretty underwhelmed because it just seemed like I was stuck in a repetitive cycle of talking to this one lady who lets you live in her attic, and then you go into the sewer to find Digimon for likes on her social media page over and over again, rinse and repeat. But once you actually travel to the digital world area with the central fountain, the game does open up a bit more, and the presentation sees a lot of improvement with varied environments and an abundance of Digimon to fight and recruit. So if you haven't made it far into the game yet, and you think you're in for another tooth-grinding descent into doing boring fetch quests, and traveling through dungeons that look like a bunch of techno brain rot, you're not. It does get better. While the Digimon are all animated well and look great, the human characters still do not pass the silhouette test. They come off as if they could have been shoved into any anime released on Crunchyroll within the last decade and you wouldn't notice. I know Digimon made its debut during a time when digital technology was experimental, rapidly improving, and easily accessible for more and more people, so as a result, the character designs and gimmicks felt very much like a flashy personification of that era, but I like that. I think that's awesome. I think they should embrace that angsty Y2K post-grunge aesthetic and have a main cast of 3 to 5 people, each with their own Digimon partner that reflects their personalities, like how it was in the original anime, instead of imitating what other people are doing. Think about it for a moment. If you took out the Digimon in this game and replaced them with, I don't know, monsters from Shin Megami Tensei, you wouldn't think it's a Digimon game with monsters from Shin Megami Tensei. You'd just think it's a Shin Megami Tensei game. So I think it's best for Bandai Namco to wean off the Shin Megami Tensei elements and replace them with elements that made the original seasons of the anime so great. Another thing I want to swiftly but thoroughly debunk is the inevitable yokel who wants to be like, Digimon was made for children, and you said in a previous video it's stupid to take a franchise aimed at children and make it appeal to adult sensibilities. So isn't it a bit hypocritical to demand that a children's media franchise shouldn't evolve with the times, or demand it be like how it was when you were a kid? First off, yes, I'm aware that a while back I made a video saying that, and if we're talking about a franchise with a more general audience like Sonic or Mario, then sure, it would be pretty stupid to only appeal to the adults who grew up with these franchises back when they were new. But here's the difference. Digimon as a franchise hasn't tried to appeal to kids in a very long time. If you don't believe me, take a look at all the Digimon games and anime series that have been released since the mid-2010s. Digimon Adventure Tri, despite how much criticism it got for being a padded out and over-glorified celebration of Digimon's 15th anniversary, has the main cast of characters being older instead of being elementary school kids, to appeal more to an older audience. I already said this, but it bears repeating that Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory were heavily inspired by elements from Shin Megami Tensei, an M-rated JRPG series. Digimon Adventure 2020 was just pure nostalgia bait meant to hook in the 2000s kids who grew up watching the show 20 years prior, and Digimon Survive has swearing, blood, and an overall more mature direction with its story. So no, I don't think it's hypocritical to demand that a Digimon video game should cater to me, when I'm essentially the target demographic. The only people who are fans of Digimon today are the millennials who grew up watching monster collecting anime and played monster collecting games in the 2000s when they were kids. And as a result, the popular thing they enjoyed as kids, and the culture surrounding that has exclusively grown up with them. Hell, a few months ago, I had a coworker who was like 5 years older than me tell me he took vacation time off to play Yu-Gi-Oh! With his friends who live far away. And I wasn't thinking, oh wow, it's sad he's using his paid time off to play a children's card game, and arranging a play date with his friends like he's a child. I was like, yeah, cool, makes sense to me. My coworker is traveling to his buddy's place, getting drunk, playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And having fun. It's the same logic with how barcades are targeted to Gen Xers. Like sure, regular arcades still exist, and kids still go to them, but the whole idea of a kid skateboarding to the local mall after school with a pocket full of quarters, and trying to market an arcade to that demographic with the goal of making a lot of money is pointless now. Because arcades don't have that same level of relevance with kids today as they did in the 80s, and it's been that way for a very long time, unless you count stuff like Dave & Buster's or Chuck E. Cheese's. But those are for special events or children's birthday parties, not really a place you'd go to chill after school. So because arcades were a popular thing for Gen Xers in the 80s, there are arcades now specifically designed for them and how they are today, where they've got food and booze on one side and arcade cabinets on the other. And I think what a lot of these companies like Bandai Namco and Konami have realized is that kids today don't give a shit about Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Digimon, or Monster Rancher, or whatever tertiary monster collecting franchise it is that they own the rights to. I'm sure some do, but most of them only give a shit about things like Fortnite, Roblox, GTA, and if it's a monster collecting game, it's Pokemon and nothing else. Sometimes in the indie scene, you have someone make a monster collecting game, but they aren't trying to exclusively market these indie games to kids, and they're already aware that they can't compete with the likes of Pokemon. Because again, that's a relic of a bygone era. So instead of companies like Konami and Bandai Namco trying to rebrand their monster collecting franchises for a new generation of kids, they're trying to win back that aging millennial demographic that remembers them and be like, alright, listen mofos, you remember that kiddie thing you liked 20 to 30 years ago that drained your parents' wallet because you were a kid and you didn't have a job, so you had to beg your parents for it because you were a kid? Well, that kiddie thing you liked is now cool and grown up and mature, and we're going to be draining your wallet instead because it's mature and now you're mature. Of course, Pokemon is the only thing in its genre not doing this because Nintendo sucks, and Pokemon is so popular that they can get away with appealing to the lowest common denominator, aka women, children, and soy boys with low IQs, who don't have any standards and just like to see cute little animals on screen, in the same way that babies enjoy seeing keys dangle in front of them. Not me though, I'm too much of a nerdy asshole to put up with that. So I reiterate, there's nobody that gives a crap about Digimon more than the people who are creeping up on 30 or 40 years old. And to steer back on topic, as an almost 30-year-old myself, the only thing in Digimon Story Time Stranger that even remotely felt like something Digimon related is when you use a flip phone that transforms into a gun, which helps out your main party during a fight when you shoot at them. See, this is the type of shit I want to see more of if Bandai Namco makes a Digimon Story Time Stranger 2. They gotta tap into that aesthetic of experimental 2000s tech in gaudy fashion. So in general, while I do think that the presentation of Time Stranger gave me a better first impression than Cyber Sleuth, and feels a bit more in line with what I expect from a Digimon game, I think Bandai Namco could have done a better job, should have done a better job, and we should demand better from them. Now let's talk about the gameplay. A lot of it is carried over from Cyber Sleuth, but with some quality of life features and additional improvements. So you know how in Pokemon, every Pokemon has either 1 or 2 types maximum based on elements? Well, in Digimon Story Time Stranger, every Digimon has 1 of 7 attributes, and don't worry, the way it works is very simple. Basically, 99% of the time, your Digimon and the Digimon you fight will either be a data type, a vaccine type, or a virus type, with the data types being weak to virus types, vaccine types being weak to data types, and virus types being weak to vaccine types. And in very rare cases, you can have a Digimon with something called a variable attribute, which mutates between data, virus, or vaccine depending on the situation. Of course, along with an attribute, your Digimon will have elemental weaknesses and resistances to things such as fire, water, light, dark, etc. Technically speaking, every Digimon is a dual type if you want to make the Pokemon comparison, but a more accurate way of explaining it is that every Digimon has a label that makes them stronger or weaker against another Digimon, while every move they use has a label that modifies the results further, for better or for worse. No Digimon can have more than one attribute, and attributes are always calculated first, while the elemental weaknesses and resistances modify the results. So let's say, for example, your opponent is a virus type and the Digimon you're using is a vaccine type. Well, you will inflict twice as much damage by default, but if that same opponent is resistant to fire and you use a fire move, then the damage will revert back to normal damage. Likewise, if your opponent is weak to fire, you'll deal 3 times the damage. But if your opponent is resistant to fire and is a data type while your Digimon is a vaccine type using a fire type move, it'll do 0.5 damage. Overall, I like how strengths and weaknesses are done here in this game since it's pretty in-depth and feels like an idea the devs came up with themselves, not ripped off from something else that's more popular. Which is good if Bandai Namco wants to make this series stand out at all in the monster-catching JRPG genre. Another thing to keep in mind is how Digivolution works since it can get pretty elaborate. So for comparison's sake, in Pokemon, every time your Pokemon evolves into something different, it's following a linear evolutionary path, unless the final evolution gives you a choice. In most cases it doesn't though. There's no way to revert to a previous evolution if you've already committed to it. You can only do it once or twice, if at all, and there's no evolutionary line that ties into another. But with Digivolution, literally anything goes so long as you meet specific stat requirements, and the Digimon you want to Digivolve into is a derivative of your current Digimon. With D-Digivolution, which is going backwards on the Digivolution path, literally anything goes, so long as the base personalities match. Your current Digimon is a derivative of the Digimon you want to D-Digivolve into, and it's something you've encountered before. Why exactly would you want to D-Digivolve though? Well, there are some benefits, like not having to go out of your way to recruit the same Digimon again because you made a mistake and picked the wrong Digivolution. Perhaps you hit a level cap with your current form, but you don't have high enough stats to Digivolve into the form you want, so you go back to keep increasing your stats because they don't go down when you D-Digivolve. Or maybe you want to use a specific move since different forms know different moves. Whatever the reason, these forms are categorized into 6 different levels. In Training 2, Rookie, Champion, Ultimate, and Mega. Something to keep in mind though is that a Champion level Digimon can't D-Digivolve into any Rookie level Digimon in existence, and a Rookie level Digimon can't Digivolve into any Champion level Digimon in existence. Sometimes you only get one option for Digivolution or D-Digivolution, sometimes you get several options, and sometimes you get like 6. It depends on the Digimon you're talking about. For example, the game gives you the option to pick one of 3 Digimon to start with. If you pick Gomamon, you can Digivolve it to Ikakumon, Digivolve it further to Mega Seadramon, and D-Digivolve it back to Ikakumon so you can D-Digivolve it to a Gabumon, because Gabumon and Gomamon are in the same tier. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, I found both the Digivolution and D-Digivolution mechanics and how Digimon Story Time Stranger handles strengths and weaknesses to be fun to experiment with, and also pretty addictive because of how dynamic it all is. Coupled with the fact that these ideas are more streamlined and made clearer to the player than they were in Cyber Sleuth, I could see myself playing this game for hours on end, grinding out different Digimon and recruiting them all. With Pokemon, these concepts, that being the core gameplay and evolution, have always been so basic that they don't require much thought from the player. But in exchange, there was always the completionist aspect of catching them all that appealed to me, which was why I kept buying them up until Sword and Shield, where I was left disappointed because they took out specific Pokemon. So if the gameplay mechanics of mainline Pokemon games are completely basic, and the completionist aspect of catching them all isn't even possible, then what's the point of playing Pokemon games at this point? Yeah, if it isn't already obvious, Pokemon has been going through an identity crisis since the Switch era. Meanwhile, other monster taming games like Shin Megami Tensei and now Digimon are giving Nintendo a run for their money. Sure, Nintendo can keep suing Palworld until they're blue in the face, but if what Game Freak keeps putting out is slop title after slop title, then other companies will come in. Now, before I conclude my final thoughts, I just want to quickly go over the DLC for this game, or rather how Bandai Namco has been handling the use of it. So if you get the base game, it's $70. In my opinion, the game is worth $50, but whatever, let's continue. If you get the deluxe edition, it's $100, comes with the season pass, additional Digimon and episode packs, plus an additional costume and farm item. If you get the ultimate fuck you, kiss my ass edition, it comes with everything in the deluxe edition, plus some additional costumes, a Cyber Sleuth BGM pack, and you unlock special Agumon and Gabumon early. Even if you choose to get the Ultimate Edition and shell out $120, there's still $30 worth of DLC that isn't given to you, which, in my opinion, is very scummy. One of these DLCs that you still have to buy separately, no matter what edition of the game you get, gives you access to what's called the Halls of EXP, Halls of Gold, and Halls of Materials. So let's say you don't feel like battling random encounters over and over again to gain money, experience, or materials, and you just want to get it all very quickly without wasting a lot of time. Well, for $7.99, you can access the Halls of EXP, the Halls of Gold, and the Halls of Materials to get a large amount of whatever it is you want very quickly. That's essentially what these DLC outer dungeons are, and I do not recommend buying it because of how it trivializes the game. There's also something I want to nitpick about the character customization. So at the beginning of the game, you get to pick what your character looks like by selecting either a male or female avatar. Okay, cool, whatever. But once you're in the actual game, if you go to the options menu, there's something I feel like I need to point out. Content warning, a little bit of value is going to be added here, so feel free to disagree or say I'm being a tad too cynical if you want, since this is just my opinion. But I think it's hilarious that for the past 10 to 15 years, I've been told by leftoids that gender and sex are meant to be separate. That trans women know that they're male and trans men know that they're female, because they aren't denying their biology. Gender is a social construct, and they just want to be treated like the gender they identify as, despite their sex, which is based on their biology, which they cannot control. These two things are supposed to be treated separately, right? Well, if that's the case, then why are Western localizers now going out of their way to call male body types Type A and female body types Type B? I'm sorry, if you're going out of your way to blur the line between the words male and female, like how you're blurring the line between the words boy and girl by using different terminology, how is that not treating sex and gender like it's the same thing? They even did this in the Dragon Quest III remake and reworked the dialogue in the game to get rid of gender-specific language with certain NPCs. Since when did the phrases boy or girl and male or female become so offensive? Honestly, at this point, I'm convinced that anything can be seen as a social construct if you hit your head with a mallet hard enough. My ass is now a social construct, guys. So if you kiss it, you're not actually kissing my ass. You're just kissing what society believes is my ass. You can think it's whatever you want to, bruh. And if you move your head down and push your face a little bit further, I have some yellow liquid for your popcorn the next time you go to the movies. And it's dairy-free, too. Like, bruh, it's a fucking video game. You actually have a choice this time around. If you're trans, then all you need to do is just pick the sex that has the body you want to have, either male or female. Problem solved! If having to look at the phrases boy or girl and male or female in a video game makes you go rabid like a wild animal, then you belong in a psychiatric ward. You're on crack. You need to see a psychotherapist or something. You're a threat to public safety. So in conclusion, Digimon Story Time Stranger is a great game. Do I think it's the most amazing game ever made that completely surpassed my expectations? Nah, not by a long shot. You can tell where they cut corners for the presentation, there's some really horrible DLC practices, and there are a lot of vestigial components present throughout the adventure, where you can tell it's just based on the skeleton of Cyber Sleuth, which was a mediocre ripoff of Persona in my eyes. But the devs put in just enough effort and Bandai Namco gave them just enough of a budget to where you can tell they want to get Digimon games out of the mediocre rut they've been in, putting them into the AAA space and expanding upon the ideas that Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory brought to the table, which to be honest are the only titles that had any potential to begin with. And despite my critiques, I'm going to say that so far this is my game of the year. It's not exactly what I wanted out of a Digimon game, but so far it's the best we got. A solid 4 out of 5. And it's the first time I can say as a Digitard with full confidence that it is worth picking up and playing, even if you're new to the franchise. The gameplay is pretty addictive, and considering how much money it made, I imagine that Bandai Namco will continue to make Digimon games like this going forward. So, I'll see you all in the next video. Peace out.